The first thing I saw was my grandson's breath turning white in the cold air. Ethan stood on the front porch in nothing but a thin t-shirt and shorts, his arms wrapped tight around his little chest, shivering against the wind that cut across the cul-de-sac. His lips were pale, trembling as he tried to hide his teeth chattering. For a moment, I thought my heart had stopped. Thanksgiving Day, a time when family is supposed to draw near, and here was my own flesh and blood left outside like a stray dog. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening from in the comments. I slammed the truck door behind me, the old hinge groaning as it always did, and hurried up the walkway. My boots crunched over the frosted grass, the chill seeping straight through the leather. All around me, the neighborhood hummed, with the comfort of the holiday windows glowing amber chimneys, puffing the distant laughter of kids playing football in the street. And yet on this doorstep, my son's doorstep, stood a boy freezing while his parents hosted a feast inside. "Ethan," I whispered, kneeling down to his level. His skin felt icy under my hands as I pulled him into a quick embrace. He smelled faintly of wood smoke and cold air. "Why are you out here, buddy?" He looked up at me with wide, unsure eyes, too afraid to answer. I didn't press. The truth already sat heavy in my gut. I stood there for a beat, my mind tumbling back through the years. I remembered other Thanksgivings, my late wife Margaret bustling around our kitchen, basting the turkey, hollering at me to get out from underfoot. The children laughing, the table full, our house ringing with the kind of noise that only comes from belonging. That life was gone now. Margaret had been gone for years. My son David had built his own life in this suburban house, with its neatly trimmed lawn and flag out front. I had held on to the hope, foolish, maybe, that today might stitch us together again, even just a little. But hope curdled fast when you're staring at your grandson's blue lips. Inside the house, muffled through the door, I heard the clatter of dishes and the rise and fall of cheerful voices. Laughter, glasses clinking. Somewhere music played old standards, crooning about gratitude and blessings. The contrast twisted in my chest like a knife. I rapped on the door once firm. Nothing. The laughter carried on. I knocked harder, the wood rattling under my knuckles. Still nothing. My anger rose hot and sudden, mixing with the cold air. My hand clenched into a fist. I pounded so hard the wreath on the door shook. "David," I barked. My voice cracked in the cold. "Karen." Through the glass, I caught the flicker of shadows. Someone glanced toward the door, then turned back to the table. The sound of a cork popping made my stomach twist. I looked back at Ethan. His eyes brimmed with something he was too young to name, shame maybe, or fear of telling truths that could get him punished later. That was enough. My patience snapped. I drew a long breath and shouted loud enough to pierce the party inside. "Do you even have a conscience?" The words ripped out of me like thunder, 6 sharp syllables that silenced the laughter behind the door. For a moment, the whole street seemed to pause. Even the neighbor's golden retriever, usually yapping at the fence, went still. The door creaked open at last, just a sliver. Warmth and the smell of roasted turkey spilled out, rich with butter and herbs. And there she was, Karen, my daughter-in-law, standing with one hand on her hip, the other clutching a glass of wine. She wore an apron dusted with flour, but her eyes were cold as slate. "What are you doing here?" she hissed. Then, catching sight of Ethan clinging to my coat sleeve, she added, "Oh, for heaven's sake, he must have run out when we weren't looking." Behind her shoulder, the dining room glowed. I glimpsed David at the head of the table, a knife poised above the turkey. His face drained of color as soon as our eyes met. He set the knife down slowly, almost guiltily, and looked away. Guests shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, whispers stirring. "Ran out," I repeated, my voice low and dangerous. "Karen, it's 30 degrees out here. He's dressed for July." She sniffed, glancing back at the table as if hoping someone might jump in to support her. No one did. David rose, but his gaze stayed pinned to the floor. He started to say something. "Dad, it's not," but stopped when I took a step inside. The silence in the room deepened. You could hear the faint tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway. I guided Ethan past Karen's rigid stance and into the entryway. He clung to me like a lifeline. The warmth inside licked at his chilled skin, but his shivering didn't ease right away. I straightened, looking around the room at the feast, laid out the golden turkey bowls of mashed potatoes glistening with butter pies cooling on the counter. Everything picture perfect, as though it belonged in a glossy magazine spread. And yet the one image that would stick in my mind forever Was my grandson standing outside forgotten? The weight of it pressed down on me heavier than any burden I'd carried in my 72 years. I let the silence stretch, daring someone to break it. Guests avoided my eyes, staring into their wine glasses or fussing with their napkins. The glow of candles cast long shadows that seemed to mock the warmth they were supposed to represent. Finally, Karen spoke again, her voice tight. "John, you're making a scene. It's Thanksgiving. Let's not ruin it for everyone." I turned to her slowly, my jaw set. "Ruin it," I said. "You ruined it the moment you left him out there." Her cheeks flushed, whether from the wine or the truth, I couldn't tell. David still hadn't looked at me. His shoulders slumped, his hands limp at his sides. For a second, I thought he might rise to his wife's defense, but then he caught the weight of my stare. His lips trembled. Whatever words he had died in his throat. I pulled Ethan closer, feeling the boy's small frame pressed against me. He buried his face in my coat, and in that gesture all the years of my own fatherhood came rushing back. The scraped knees I'd bandaged, the late nights I'd rocked my children through fevers, the promises I'd kept even when the world was unkind. And here stood my son, too weak to keep his own child safe on the very holiday meant to celebrate family. The ache in my chest burned hotter than the anger. But anger had its place too, and I felt it settling into my bones with a clarity I hadn't known in years. I wasn't leaving. Not this time. I eased myself into one of the empty chairs by the doorway, Ethan still pressed to my side. My knees ached from the cold, but I didn't mind. What mattered was keeping the boy close, letting him feel the kind of shelter he should have had all along. Dad, David finally muttered, his voice so low I had to lean forward to catch it. It's not what you think." I let out a short, bitter laugh. "Then you better pray it's worse, because what I think is already bad enough." Karen bristled, her eyes narrowing as she stood between me and the table like a guard at a gate. "John, please. You always twist things. He was fine. It's not like he was out there all day." All day, my voice cracked like a whip, and several guests jumped. 5 minutes in that cold is too long for a child, and you know it. Ethan stirred, peeking up at me with eyes that asked questions he couldn't form. I gave his shoulder a squeeze, trying to steady my own breathing. The turkey's scent hung heavy in the air, but it didn't tempt me. I looked around that table at faces I didn't know well. Neighbors, co-workers, maybe members from Karen's side of the family. They shifted uneasily, forks clinking against plates as they avoided the storm brewing in the room. One older man at the far end cleared his throat as if to speak, then thought better of it. No one wanted to wade into a fight that wasn't theirs. I leaned forward, my eyes never leaving my son. "David, look at me." Slowly, painfully, he raised his head. For a brief second, I saw the boy he once was, the kid who'd carried a baseball glove everywhere, who used to sneak pie off the counter when his mother's back was turned. But that boy was gone, buried under years of compromise and silence. "You left your own son outside on Thanksgiving," I said. "I don't care what excuse you give me. Nothing makes that right." His lips parted, but the words tangled. He looked at Karen, who gave a sharp shake of her head. Whatever defense he had melted away. The clock in the hall struck 5, the chimes echoing like a verdict. I shifted my gaze back to Karen. "I lost my wife to cancer, but I never once let my kids go without warmth, without safety. You talk about ruining the holiday. You've already hollowed it out. You've made it a showpiece for people who don't see the truth." Her cheeks burned red. "You don't know what we've been through," she snapped. "Bills stress everything on our shoulders. Stress doesn't give you permission to neglect a child." I cut in, my tone sharp. "I worked double shifts at the factory, came home with my back screaming, and still managed to be a father. Don't talk to me about stress." The room grew taut as a wire. You could feel the guests leaning back as though distance might protect them from the words slicing through the air. Ethan's small hand tugged at my sleeve. I looked down and his eyes shimmered. He didn't say a word, but he didn't need to. That silent plea sealed something inside me. I stood, pulling him up with me. His legs wobbled from the cold, but he stayed upright, gripping my hand like a rope tossed to a drowning man. I faced the table, letting my eyes sweep across every pair of lowered gazes. "Do you see this boy?" I asked, my voice low, trembling with the force of it. "He's what matters. Not the turkey, not the wine, not your picture-perfect gathering. Him. And you failed him today." No one answered. I turned back to David. He swallowed hard, his throat working as though the words he wanted to speak were jagged stones. His hands balled into fists at his sides, then loosened. Finally, he dropped his gaze again, shame dragging it down like a weight. That silence told me more than any excuse ever could. I guided Ethan toward the entryway, his small footsteps echoing on the hardwood. As we reached the door, the wreath still trembling from my earlier pounding, I glanced back one last time. The dining room glowed golden, the table groaning under food, but the warmth was false. I could see it now, the cracks beneath the polish, the emptiness behind the smiles. I didn't say another word. The boy in my care spoke louder than anything I could have added. When I opened the door, the cold air rushed in again, crisp and biting. Ethan shivered and I pulled him close, wrapping my coat around him. Behind us, the house fell quiet, like a stage after the curtain drops. We stepped out into the night under a sky fading into indigo. Porch lights flickered on across the street, one by one, little beacons in the darkness. And for the first time in years, I felt a fire in my chest, not just anger, but resolve. This wasn't over. The words I'd thrown into that house still rang in the air. Do you even have a conscience? They seemed to hang above the dining room like smoke after a firework. For a long moment, no one moved. No one breathed. Even the flicker of the candles felt hesitant. Karen's eyes darted from me to Ethan and back again, her mouth tightening into a sharp line. She stepped forward, wine glass still in her hand, and spoke with a clipped tone that carried across the table. You can't just storm in here like this, she said. You weren't invited. We had things under control. I looked at Ethan, his small frame pressed against my leg, his arms wrapped around himself like he was afraid I'd let him go. Does this look like control to you? I asked, my voice low but cutting. Leaving a boy outside in the cold, Karen sniffed. He snuck out. He's been doing that lately. Always wandering. He's stubborn. You know how kids can be. The lie curdled in the air. I knew stubborn children. I'd raised 2 of them. Stubborn kids stomped their feet, argued about bedtime, maybe slammed a door or 2. They didn't choose to stand barefoot on a frozen porch in November. I turned my eyes toward David. He was still standing near the head of the table, shoulders hunched, staring down at the carving knife resting on the platter. His lips parted, and for a second I thought he might speak up, might defend his son, or even admit fault. But then Karen shot him a look sharp as broken glass. His gaze dropped to the floor. David, I said, my tone heavy, say something. The room leaned in, guests holding their breath as though waiting for a verdict. But David just shook his head, muttering, It's not the way it looks. My chest tightened. Then explain it to me, because from where I stand, it looks exactly like neglect. A murmur rose around the table. Forks clinked against china as nervous hands pretended to busy themselves. A woman in a red sweater coughed a hollow sound meant to break the silence. No one met my eyes. Karen laughed suddenly, brittle and too loud. Honestly, John, you always think the worst. We had the door open just a minute ago to let the smoke out. He must have slipped past. The explanation sounded rehearsed, flimsy. I stepped farther into the room, Ethan clinging tighter to me. The warmth of the house should have thawed him, but his shivering only eased a little. You call this a family gathering? I asked, sweeping my gaze over the table. The turkey gleamed under the lights, bowls of stuffing and cranberry sauce lined up neatly, pies cooling on the counter. Everything perfect, except the truth. This table is dressed up like a magazine cover, but the heart of it is rotten. You can't hide that. Karen's face flushed deep red. She slammed her glass down on the buffet so hard it sloshed over the rim. Don't you dare come into my house and insult us. We work hard. We've built this home, this life without your help. You have no right to judge. Without my help, I shot back. Who paid your first down payment when the bank turned you away? Who co-signed the loan so you could have this roof over your head? A few heads turned toward David. He shifted uneasily, tugging at his collar, but kept silent. Don't, Karen snapped. Don't drag money into this. Money is already in this, I said, my voice rising. Because while you sit at this table and boast about independence, my grandson is freezing outside. Ethan pressed closer, his small hand trembling in mine. The heat in the room grew stifling, not from the fireplace, but from the eyes avoiding mine, from the truth no one wanted to touch. I leaned down to Ethan's ear. You're safe now, I whispered. He nodded, his teeth still chattering. The silence that followed was broken only by the hum of the refrigerator and the faint sound of a football game playing from a neighbor's living room down the street. In this house, though, the celebration had stopped. Finally, David's voice came thin and strained. "Dad, please don't make a scene." I turned on him, the words like a whip. "Don't make a scene. You left your child to the cold. If this isn't worth a scene, then nothing is." Karen's jaw clenched. "He's exaggerating," she told the guests, as if appealing to a jury. "John has always had a temper. He twists things to make himself the hero." The room stirred again. Some of the guests exchanged glances, discomfort etched across their faces. I could feel attention crackle like static. "Hero," I said quietly, but my words carried. "No, just a grandfather who refuses to look away." The air grew heavy again, like a storm pressing against the walls. I could see in their faces that this Thanksgiving dinner was no longer a celebration. It had become something else entirely, a reckoning. Karen folded her arms, standing tall like she could block the truth from moving any further into the room. The guests sat stiff, forks frozen halfway to their mouths, eyes darting toward the door as if considering escape. The smell of roasted turkey, once comforting, now clung to the air like something gone sour. I looked at each face one by one. They shifted in their seats, pretending to adjust napkins or sip water. No one wanted to be here anymore. No one wanted to watch a family unravel in real time. "This isn't about me barging in," I said, my voice calm but sharp. "It's about a child being left in the cold while grown folks fill their bellies. You want to call that tradition? You want to call that Thanksgiving?" Karen's lips pressed so tightly they turned white. Her hands trembled where they gripped her elbows, but she masked it with a scowl. "We don't need lectures from you. You raised your kids in another time. Things are different now." I felt my jaw clench. "Different," I said. "Kids still need warmth. They still need love. That hasn't changed in 100 years, and it won't change in 100 more." Her glare cut at me, but I noticed the flicker in her eyes, the quick glance toward David. It was a silent command, a demand for him to stand beside her. He shifted uncomfortably, his chair scraping as he half rose. "Dad," he began, his voice heavy. "Maybe you should go. We'll talk about this later after things calm down." I took a step closer, Ethan's hand still clutched in mine. "Later? There's no later when a boy could have gotten sick or worse. I won't be pushed out, not this time." David's shoulders slumped. He looked down at his shoes, unable to meet my eyes. I could see the battle in him, the son I raised, fighting with the husband he'd become. The silence stretched until it hurt. Across the table, one of the guests, a woman with kind eyes and a nervous frown, whispered. He was out there in the cold. Her voice cracked barely above a breath. I nodded once. He was. The woman set her fork down, her appetite gone. The spell of silence shattered. A couple of other guests pushed back from the table, murmuring excuses, their chairs scraping the hardwood as they slipped out quickly, coats pulled tight. They didn't want to be witnesses. Karen bristled, her face darkening. "You see what you've done? You've embarrassed us in front of everyone." I straightened. "No, Karen. You did that yourself." The front door rattled as a gust of wind pressed against it, the sound echoing through the tense room like a reminder of the cold waiting outside. Ethan shivered again and buried his face against my side. I bent low, whispering, so only he could hear. "I've got you, son. They won't put you out there again. Not while I'm here." His small fingers tightened around mine, desperate, trusting. That grip lit a fire inside me, stronger than any argument. I raised my head and looked at David once more. His eyes glistened, and for a second, just a second, I thought he might break free of the silence. Admit the truth, stand for his boy. But then Karen's hand found his wrist, squeezing, and the moment passed. He looked away. Something in me hardened. I had wanted this night to be about reunion, about finding family again after years of distance. Instead, I'd found neglect, cowardice, and a table more worried about appearances than a child's safety. The clink of a knife against a plate jolted the room back into motion. Guests began whispering again, some staring at me like I was the intruder, others at Karen like she was the spectacle. But none of it mattered. I stood tall, my voice steady, and let it cut through the noise. "This ends tonight." The words dropped heavy, final, like the slam of a gavel. And though I didn't yet know how I meant every syllable. The silence in that dining room was so tight I could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, steady and cold. My words still hung in the air, and I could feel every set of eyes trying to burn holes in me, some with shame, others with anger. I thought maybe that was the end of it, that the dinner had collapsed under its own weight and I would leave with Ethan wrapped in my coat. But that's when I heard it. The sharp, unmistakable voice of Martha Thompson. Her tone carried straight through the walls, louder than any hymn I'd ever heard her sing at church. "I'm calling the cops." The words made everyone at the table jolt. Karen froze her jaw slack for the first time all night. David looked up as if a bell had rung inside him. And me, I felt both dread and relief mixed in one sharp pang. I turned toward the window. Martha was there on her porch phone and her handcoat wrapped tight around her frame. Even in the glow of her porch light, I could see the anger carved into her face. She wasn't a woman given to shouting, not since I'd known her. She was the kind to wave from across the street to ask about my knees when she caught me limping to bring a casserole when Margaret passed. But tonight her eyes were burning. The door behind me creaked open wider, as if the house itself had no choice but to hear her. Inside, voices erupted. The police one guest whispered. Another muttered, "Oh my lord." Chairs scraped as people shifted uncomfortably, caught between curiosity and panic. Karen found her voice again, but it was shrill now, lacking the control she had moments ago. She doesn't know what she's talking about. She's always had it out for me. I looked at her, then back at Martha, who was already pressing numbers on her phone. My chest tightened. For years, I'd carried my suspicions in silence, swallowing them like bitter medicine. Martha, though she was about to drag them out into the open. Martha's voice rang again, this time aimed at me. "John, I told you before, didn't I? I've seen this too many times. That boy's been left outside before. I called APS, but they never did a damn thing." I swallowed hard. She had told me in passing conversations over fences and sidewalks hints that she worried about Ethan. I'd brushed them aside, thinking maybe she'd misunderstood. I wanted to believe David's house was a place of safety. I didn't want to admit the truth even to myself. Karen stormed past me to the door, yanking it open. Cold air rushed in again and Martha's voice carried stronger. "Go ahead, Karen, scream all you want. I'm not the one with a freezing child on my conscience." The phone was already to her ear. I heard her say the words clear and unshakable. "Yes, police. I need someone to come right away. There's a child at risk." The entire dining room fell into a hush. The clinking of silverware, the shifting of chairs, it all stopped. Even Ethan, pressed against my leg, seemed to sense the weight of that call. Karen spun back around, her face flushed, her breathing shallow. She pointed at Martha through the open door. "She's crazy. She's been spying on us for years. She wants to tear this family apart." But no one at the table nodded. No one rose to defend her. The only sound was Martha's steady voice as she gave the dispatcher our address. David sank back into his chair, his hands rubbing at his temples like he could squeeze away the truth pressing in on him. I watched him, hoping, begging, silently for him to speak, to stand for his own child before strangers had to do it. But he sat there, silent, swallowed whole by fear and shame. The guests shifted again, whispering under their breath. "Did you hear that she called APS before? Oh Lord, poor boy." I lifted Ethan into my arms, his body light but tense. He buried his face against my shoulder as though the sound of Martha's voice promised both danger and rescue. And standing there in that dining room full of people who had come for turkey and pie, but had been served the truth instead, I realized something. It wasn't just me anymore. The secret Karen and David had tried to keep locked behind that shiny front door was now spilling out into the street, into the community. The kind of thing you can't take back. Martha didn't lower her phone until she'd finished spelling out every detail to the dispatcher. She gave the address, the names she knew, even mentioned that she'd reported before. Then she snapped the phone shut with a finality that made the whole room flinch. Karen slammed the door shut, her back against it, as though she could barricade the world outside. "This is insane," she hissed. "John, you're going to let that nosy widow ruin us." I shifted Ethan higher in my arms. His cheek was still cold against my neck, and I kissed the crown of his head. "She's not ruining you, Karen. You did that yourself." Karen's face twisted, but before she could spit out more words, Martha's voice carried again from her porch, cutting through the door like a knife. "They're on their way. I'll be waiting right here when they come." The dining room erupted into murmurs, louder now, no longer whispers. A man near the end of the table pushed his chair back and stood muttering something about needing to check on his car. A woman gathered her coat, shaking her head. Guests who had come to carve turkey were now eager to vanish before flashing lights arrived. David ran a hand through his hair, his face pale. "Karen, maybe we should just—" "Don't you dare," she snapped, her voice sharp as a slap. "We'll handle this ourselves. We don't need outsiders meddling." I took a step closer to them, my voice steady. "Outsiders. That's your son, and you treated him like a stray dog. You should thank God Martha saw what she did." David's eyes darted between me and Karen, his lips trembling as though words wanted out but couldn't find the courage. For a brief moment I thought he might side with me, admit the truth before uniforms knocked on the door. But his shoulders collapsed instead, his gaze dropping back to the floor. Karen turned on me. "You think this makes you a hero, dragging police into our home? You'll tear this family apart." I didn't flinch. A family that turns its back on a child is already torn apart. Ethan shifted in my arms, his small voice finally breaking through the tension. "Grandpa," he whispered, "are we going to be okay?" That whisper pierced the room deeper than any accusation. Guests glanced at one another, shame etched on their faces. David swallowed hard, blinking rapidly. Karen froze her hand halfway to the table, unable to answer. I pressed my lips to Ethan's temple. "Yes, son," I murmured loud enough for everyone to hear. "We're going to be okay. I'll make sure of it." Outside, a dog barked, followed by the faint wail of a siren in the distance. It grew louder, winding through the quiet neighborhood streets. Each passing second was another nail in the coffin of the silence Karen had fought to keep. Martha's silhouette stood firm in her porch light, arms crossed, waiting. Inside, the guests fell into uneasy silence again, their forks abandoned, the turkey cooling untouched. The feast had turned into evidence, the laughter into testimony. As the siren drew closer, Karen pressed her palms flat against the door as though sheer will could stop what was coming. David sat slumped in his chair, his face buried in his hands. And I stood holding my grandson, feeling the weight of years of disappointment finally shift into something sharper resolve. The flashing red and blue lights spilled into the windows a moment later. No one spoke. The sound of tires crunching over gravel in the driveway made my chest tighten. This wasn't just a family fight anymore. It was bigger now, and there would be no going back. The red and blue lights cut through the dining room curtains, washing the walls with streaks of color that didn't belong in a Thanksgiving home. The sirens faded as the cruiser stopped out front, but the echo of them still hummed in my chest. Everyone in the room stiffened. The clatter of plates and nervous coughs were the only sounds left. Karen stood frozen by the door, hands clenched into fists so tight her knuckles whitened. David stayed hunched in his chair, his face in his palms, while Ethan's weight in my arms reminded me what this was all about. A knock came firm and commanding. Before Karen could protest, Martha's voice rang from the porch. "Right here, officers." "This is the house." Karen whipped around, panic seeping into her voice. "Don't open it! Don't you dare!" But the door opened anyway. Two officers stepped in the cold air, rushing with them. The taller one, his badge reading Daniel, surveyed the room with steady eyes. His partner, younger, carried a notepad already in hand. "What seems to be the problem tonight?" Daniels asked, his tone even, but not unkind. Martha stepped right in behind them, her coat still buttoned tight. "That boy was left outside in the cold," she said, pointing at Ethan in my arms. "And this isn't the first time." Karen shot forward, her voice climbing high. "That's ridiculous. He must have wandered out for just a moment. We had everything under control." Daniel's gaze shifted from Karen to me, then down to Ethan. The boy buried his face deeper into my shoulder. Daniels crouched slightly, softening his voice. "Son, you cold." Ethan gave the smallest nod without lifting his head. The younger officer scribbled something. Daniels straightened, his expression firm now. "We're going to need to take a look around." Karen barked a laugh, brittle as glass. "You can't just barge into our home." Daniels didn't flinch. "Ma'am, when there's a report of a child in danger, we can and we will cooperate, and this will go smoother for everyone." I shifted Ethan onto the couch, wrapping a blanket around him that one of the guests finally fetched. My hands shook, but not from the cold. From the anger I'd kept locked up for too long. The officers split up. Daniels motioned toward the hallway. "Bedrooms this way." David muttered, "Yes," his voice barely audible. He trailed after them like a shadow, Karen storming close behind, firing off excuses. "He has plenty of blankets. He just doesn't like using them. He's stubborn, picky." Daniels pushed the door open. The sight inside made my stomach drop. The room was bare, a thin mattress on the floor, no sheets, no comforter, no pillow worth the name. The window cracked a draft cutting through the air. A small dresser stood empty except for a couple of crumpled shirts. Daniels reached down, touched the mattress, then pulled his hand back with a grimace. "Cold as ice," he said. The younger officer's flashlight swept over the room, landing on the wall where faint scratches marked the paint as if tiny fingers had clawed for attention no one gave. He scribbled faster. Karen folded her arms, her chin high. "So what? Some kids sleep light. He doesn't mind it." I stepped into the doorway, fury tightening my chest. This is neglect, plain and simple. Karen spun, her eyes blazing. "You don't get to tell us how to raise our son." Daniels held up a hand before I could retort. His voice was calm, but sharp enough to cut steel. "Enough! This is no way for a child to live." The flashlight beam paused on Ethan's school backpack tossed in the corner. Daniels crouched, pulled it open. Inside were a few worksheets, wrinkled and smeared, and an apple with a brown bruise. At the bottom, he lifted out a small sweatshirt, thin sleeves fraying. He held it up. "This all he's got for winter." David's voice cracked for the first time. We were going to buy him a coat next week. Next week doesn't keep him warm tonight," Daniel said. He looked at me then, and for a moment something passed between us, acknowledgement, maybe even quiet respect. I felt Ethan's eyes on me from down the hall, his little body huddled in the blanket, trembling. And I knew this wasn't just my fight anymore. It was his survival. The air in that narrow hallway felt colder than the night outside. Daniels folded the sweatshirt back into the backpack with a care that contrasted with the tension simmering in the house. He stood his frame, filling the doorway, and faced David. "Mr. Miller," he said evenly, "do you understand what kind of situation this is?" David's throat worked, like he wanted to answer. But no words came. His shoulders sagged. His eyes darted between me and Karen. Finally, he whispered, "We didn't mean for it to be like this." Karen stepped in front of him, her chin jutted forward. "Don't say another word, David. This is all blown out of proportion." Daniels didn't even blink. He motioned toward his partner, who was already noting down every word. "We're not here to take sides. We're here because a child's welfare is at stake." We moved back to the dining room, the guests still glued to their seats, wide-eyed. The smell of turkey and sweet potatoes had turned bitter in the air, replaced by the metallic taste of fear and shame. Daniels crouched in front of Ethan again. "Buddy, did anyone hurt you?" he asked gently. Ethan's fingers twisted into the blanket. He didn't answer, but he lifted one wrist, just enough for the officer to notice the faint yellow marks circling his skin. My chest tightened. I reached for the armrest just to steady myself. Daniel's jaw clenched as he exchanged a look with his partner. "We'll need to document this," the younger officer said quietly. Karen lunged forward, her voice sharp enough to split the room. "Those are from playing outside. He falls all the time. Kids bruise. It's normal." Her shrill tone silenced everyone. The clink of a fork falling onto a plate echoed louder than it should have. Daniels straightened his voice now, carrying the authority of someone used to ending arguments. "Ma'am, please sit down. We're proceeding with a formal report. If you interfere again, we'll have no choice but to escort you outside." For the first time, Karen faltered. Her lips trembled and she glanced at the guests as if looking for an ally. No one moved. Not a soul defended her. I stepped forward, my hand resting on Ethan's shoulder. My voice came out steady, though my heart was pounding hard enough to shake the words. "You see this boy shivering in front of you in a house full of food and warmth, and you still deny it. This isn't parenting. This is cruelty." Karen's eyes shot daggers at me. "You always wanted to make me look like the villain. You're just a bitter old man who can't let go of control." But her words fell flat. Daniels' partner had begun snapping photos of the bare bedroom, the bruises, the thin sweatshirt. Every flash was another nail sealing the truth. The weight of silence pressed heavy. Finally, Daniels exhaled and spoke with quiet finality. This might be more than child neglect. The words dropped into the room like stones into a pond. Ripples of shock spread across every face at that table. David slumped deeper into his chair, covering his mouth with both hands as if to hold back the truth he'd buried too long. Karen looked around wildly, but the walls had closed in. I glanced at Ethan. His small frame wrapped tight in the blanket, his eyes wide but no longer hiding. For the first time that night, I felt a shift inside me. Not just fury, but a deep, unshakable certainty. This wasn't the end of the fight. This was the beginning. The house had gone from festive to funereal. The guests no longer whispered. They simply sat rigid, as if afraid that any movement might drag them into the storm unraveling inside those walls. The officers lingered careful, methodical. I thought the worst had already been laid bare. I was wrong. Officer Daniel's partner asked for a quiet space to review paperwork. David muttered something about the study and shuffled down the hall with them. I followed, my chest heavy but my feet moving of their own accord. I needed to know everything. The study smelled of stale coffee and printer ink. Stacks of mail were scattered across the desk, unopened bills jammed under glossy magazines. Daniels motioned toward the papers. "We'll need to see any financial documents you've got lying around. Bank statements, tax returns, whatever's here." Karen tried to block the doorway. "You can't just snoop through our private finances. This is harassment." Daniels's gaze cut sharp. "Ma'am, there's probable cause. If you prefer, we can call a judge right now and get a warrant. That'll only make this worse." Her face paled and she stepped aside. David didn't argue. He pulled open a drawer and dropped a bundle of envelopes onto the desk. As the officers sorted, I spotted a letterhead. I recognized the logo from my retirement account. My throat went dry. Weeks earlier, I'd gotten a call from the bank about unusual withdrawals, but I'd brushed it off as a clerical error. Now the envelope seemed to pulse in my vision. Daniel slid it open, scanning with practiced eyes. His brow furrowed. He passed it to his partner, who scribbled furiously. Then Daniels looked straight at me. "Mr. Miller, can you confirm this is your account?" I nodded, though my hands trembled. He tapped the page. Large sums were withdrawn recently. "Do you recall authorizing this?" No. I never signed anything. Daniels lifted another document from the pile. His voice grew graver. "There's a power of attorney on file here. It names your son David Miller." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Power of attorney words I'd heard at the bank years ago when setting up basic paperwork after my wife passed. I had assumed it was just precaution, something harmless. Daniels laid out the papers in a neat row, his finger tracing the signatures. "These forms gave your son legal authority to access your accounts. But the withdrawals? These aren't for medical bills or essentials. They're deposits toward this property, luxury purchases, even a loan payoff." My knees nearly buckled. I gripped the back of a chair, staring at David. He wouldn't meet my eyes. Karen's voice broke the silence, shrill and defensive. "So what if he used it? It's family money. He was just taking what would be his one day anyway." The words sliced deeper than any knife. My savings, 40 years of factory shifts, long nights at the diner, when hours were cut, every scraped dollar my wife and I had tucked away gone to feed their vanity. Daniels looked between us, his voice steady but heavy. "Mr. Miller, I think your son's been stealing from you." The sentence hung in the room, heavier than any accusation I'd ever heard. David finally lifted his face. Tears rimmed his eyes, but shame dragged them back down. He opened his mouth, but Karen's glare silenced him. I couldn't move. My chest ached, my breath shallow. The betrayal wasn't abstract anymore. It was written in ink, stamped with a notary seal. And for the first time that night, I realized saving Ethan wasn't the only battle I had to fight. The silence in that study was suffocating. My eyes burned as I stared at the papers spread across the desk, each one a fresh wound. Every check stub, every withdrawal slip felt like a betrayal my heart had to absorb all over again. Daniels tapped the corner of one document. "These dates line up with the down payment on this house, the remodel invoices, even the SUV out front. Mr. Miller, all of this came from your retirement savings." Karen scoffed, folding her arms tight. "And what? You'd rather see that money rot in a bank while he struggles to keep a roof over his head. Families help each other. That's how it works." I turned to her, my voice rough with years of swallowed rage. "Help, you call this help? You left my grandson freezing outside while you sat at a table bought with my wife's life savings. That's not help, Karen. That's theft dressed up as entitlement." David shifted uneasily, his shoulders hunched, as if he wanted to fold into himself. "Dad, His voice cracked and he swallowed hard. I thought I could handle it. The bills, the mortgage, the pressure. Karen kept saying it was okay, that you'd understand one day. I stepped closer, the weight of decades pressing down on my words. Understand what, David? That you forged my trust? That you let a piece of paper matter more than the blood running through your veins? He didn't answer. His head hung low, his hands limp at his sides. Daniels slid the papers into a folder. Mr. Miller, you'll need to contact your bank first thing, and I'll be forwarding this to the county prosecutor's office. Elder financial exploitation is a serious offense. With child neglect already in play, this will not go unnoticed. Karen's composure cracked. Her voice rose higher, desperate. You can't just throw words like exploitation around. He's your own father. This will ruin us. I stared at her, my voice low, steady, every syllable meant to strike. You ruined yourself the day you decided my hard work was yours to plunder. From the doorway, Martha's voice carried in soft but resolute. John, I tried to warn people. I saw them flashing money at the HOA meeting, talking about renovations like money grew on trees. I knew it didn't come from honest work. The officers turned at her words, noting every detail. For once, Karen was speechless. Daniels gathered the files, tucking them into an evidence bag. His tone carried the weight of inevitability. This isn't just a family dispute anymore. These documents speak louder than excuses. The truth pressed down on David like a mountain. His knees buckled, and he dropped into a chair, burying his face in his hands. A muffled sob escaped before he could choke it back. Karen stood rigid, her jaw tight, refusing to break even as the walls closed in. I stepped back, the ache in my chest, a mix of grief and grim resolve. This was no longer just about saving Ethan from the cold. It was about saving what was left of my dignity, my wife's memory, and the years of sacrifice that built every dollar they had stolen. Daniels looked at me one last time before sealing the evidence bag. His words were simple, but they carried all the weight of the law. Mr. Miller will make sure this is investigated thoroughly. You're not alone in this anymore. And for the first time that night, I felt something shift. Not relief, not yet, but the faintest glimmer of justice edging its way into the darkness. The study felt like it was collapsing in on itself, the air so heavy I could hardly breathe. The folder of papers sat sealed on the desk, damning in its silence. Daniels and his partner stepped out to make some calls, leaving us in the wreckage of what they'd uncovered. David slumped in the chair, his shoulders caved, his hands covering his face. For a long time, no one spoke. Then slowly a sound broke from him, a sob, raw and unguarded. Dad, he whispered through his fingers. I never wanted it to get this far. I thought I was doing what I had to do. I stood frozen, torn between the instinct to comfort my son and the knowledge of what he had done. Doing what you had to do. You bled me dry, David. You left your boy out in the cold while you sat here in a house built on lies. Karen snapped upright, her voice slicing the air. Don't listen to him. He's twisting everything. David, don't let him poison you against your own family. But David shook his head, tears sliding down his cheeks. Karen, stop. It's true. I let you talk me into this. You said it was just a signature, that Dad wouldn't notice, that it was our right anyway. Karen spun on him, her eyes blazing. So now you're going to turn on me? After everything I've carried for this family, he's loving this. He's wanted to destroy us from the start. I felt the walls of the house vibrating with their voices, as if even the foundation could sense the fracture tearing us apart. From the hallway, I could hear the low murmur of guests huddling together. Whispers were spreading like wildfire. Word would not stay contained within these walls. By Sunday, every pew at the church would buzz with it. By Monday, the HOA would be whispering it in the grocery line. David lifted his head, his face blotched red with shame. I was drowning, Dad. The mortgage, the credit cards, the business loan, Karen insisted we take it all stacked up. She kept saying the money was sitting there waiting, that it wasn't stealing if it was going to be mine one day. And I wanted to believe her. Karen's voice rose to a shriek. You weak coward. Don't you dare pin this on me. You think he's going to save you. He doesn't care about us. He wants to see us ruined. Her fury filled the room, but David didn't fight back this time. His gaze drifted toward Ethan, sitting small and silent on the couch, clutching that blanket like a lifeline. For a moment, the boy's wide, fearful eyes met his father's, and something inside David seemed to break. He buried his face in his hands again, his body shaking. What have I done? The guests shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke. Martha's voice floated from the doorway, soft but firm. We've all seen enough, David. Pretending won't change the truth anymore. I stepped forward, planting my hands on the desk, leaning close enough that my voice reached only him. You had choices, son, and every time you chose wrong. Tonight you don't get to hide behind her excuses anymore. The room buzzed with murmurs like bees stirring in a hive. The fracture wasn't just in this family, it was in the community that had watched us for years, believing our lives were whole. Now the cracks were on full display. I felt my knees tremble, but my voice steadied as I straightened up. My words came quiet, but they cut through the noise with a finality that silenced even Karen. This ends tonight. Karen's shriek still rang in my ears when the front door banged open. Daniels reappeared, his partner close behind both of them, speaking quietly into their radios before clipping them back on their belts. The sight of authority in that room pulled every whispered conversation to silence. Mr. Miller Daniels, said his voice carrying like a verdict, we've contacted Child Protective Services. An emergency hearing will be scheduled first thing. Until then, Ethan is to remain in safe custody. That means no unsupervised contact with either parent. Karen gasped as if struck. You can't take him away from me. He's my son. Martha's voice rose from the corner, steady and unsparing. Your son who was shivering in the cold while you poured wine at that table. That boy deserves better. Karen spun toward her, eyes wild. You meddling old witch. This is all your fault. But Martha didn't flinch. She had lived through loss, through being dismissed when she raised concerns before. Her spine was steel now. David stayed slumped, his face buried in his hands. For the first time I saw not anger in him, but collapse, like a man realizing the dam had burst and nothing could hold back the flood. Daniels looked at him directly. Mr. Miller, you'll have your chance to explain in court. Tonight the priority is Ethan's safety. Do you understand? David nodded weakly without lifting his head. Karen shook hers violently, pacing the rug like a caged animal. The guests, once frozen, began edging toward the door. They wanted no part of what this house had become. I could almost hear their thoughts. This story would be told over coffee at the diner, whispered in the pews come Sunday, dissected in the aisles of the grocery store. The fracture had already spread beyond these walls. I bent down to Ethan's level, brushing a hand over his damp hair. His eyes clung to mine, wide and uncertain. You're safe tonight, buddy. That's what matters. The boy nodded, his lips trembling, but his body leaning into my side. Karen's voice broke through again, hoarse from shouting. He's poisoning you, David. Can't you see he's turning you against your own family? David lifted his head at last, eyes rimmed red. He looked at her long and hard, then at Ethan, then finally at me. His words cracked in the middle, but they landed heavy. No, Karen. We did this ourselves. Her mouth fell open. For once, she had no retort. The silence that followed was deeper than any shouting. Even Daniels seemed to pause, letting the weight of it settle. I rose to my feet, my knees stiff, but my voice unshaken. Looking at both of them, my son broken, my daughter-in-law defiant, I spoke the only truth that mattered. This family shattered the moment greed came before love. But it won't go on another day. Tonight it ends. The words echoed through the house, final as a gavel. The days after that Thanksgiving felt like walking through fog. News spread quicker than I could keep up with it, neighbors whispering in the grocery aisle, church friend calling to check in but secretly fishing for details. Everyone knew something had happened at David's house, and everyone had their version of the story, but nothing compared to the letter that came in the mail. Heavy paper, bold print at the top, a court summons. My heart pounded as I read the words. Probate court, financial exploitation, custody hearing. Everything I had feared was now official. I sat at the kitchen table, the same one my wife and I had bought on layaway 40 years ago, the wood scarred from decades of family meals. The letter trembled in my hands. For the first time since she passed, I wished she were there beside me, telling me we'd face it together. Martha came by that evening with a casserole, the way church folks always do when the air feels heavy with trouble. She set it down, folded her hands, and said, John, you don't have to do this alone. Get yourself a good lawyer. Don't let them corner you. So I did. I hired a man named Richard Ellis, a gray-haired attorney with kind eyes but a spine that hadn't bent in 30 years of probate cases. He listened as I laid out everything: Ethan, the neglect, the power of attorney, the withdrawals. When I finished, he tapped his pen on his notepad and said, Your Honor won't need theatrics. The facts will be enough. but we'll make sure the truth doesn't get buried. The morning of the hearing, I drove into town in my old pickup, Ethan beside me, clutching a stuffed bear someone from church had given him. My palms were slick on the wheel. The courthouse loomed ahead at its stone facade, as stern as the justice it promised. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of old paper and floor polish. Families shuffled through hallways, some weeping, some arguing, all waiting for their turn before the bench. We were no different, though the weight in my chest felt heavier than any I'd carried before. David and Karen were already seated when I entered the courtroom. David looked smaller somehow, his shoulders hunched, his tie crooked. Karen, though, sat rigid, her jaw set like granite. She gave me a glare sharp enough to cut glass. When the bailiff called our case, we all rose. The judge, a woman with silver hair pulled back tight, adjusted her glasses as she scanned the file before her. Her voice carried across the room with crisp authority. This case concerns allegations of elder financial abuse and child neglect. John Miller, you are the petitioner. Yes, Your Honor, I said, my voice steady, though my knees wobbled. Richard Ellis rose beside me, buttoning his suit coat. Your Honor, this is indeed a case of elder financial abuse. The evidence will show that Mr. Miller's son and daughter-in-law exploited a power of attorney to drain his retirement accounts using the funds for personal gain while neglecting the welfare of their minor child. Karen hissed, "That's a lie." But the judge silenced her with a raised hand. The clerk wheeled in a box of evidence, every envelope and statement I'd watched Daniels bag up that night. Ellis pulled out documents one by one, laying them in neat order before the judge. Bank withdrawals checks signed under David's name, receipts for home renovations, even car payments. The judge leafed through them, her face unreadable. She looked up at David. "Mr. Miller, did you or did you not use your father's funds without his consent?" David's lips parted, but no words came. His eyes darted toward Karen. She stared at him rigid, as if daring him to betray her. The judge waited. The silence stretched heavy as chains. Finally, David's shoulders slumped, and he whispered, "Yes." The word echoed through the courtroom, quiet but devastating. The judge scribbled a note, then looked to Ellis. "Continue." He nodded, sliding forward another stack. "Your Honor, beyond the financial exploitation, this case also raises grave concerns about the child Ethan Miller. Witness testimony and photographic evidence will demonstrate neglect. The child was found outside in the cold on Thanksgiving, underdressed with visible bruises. His bedroom was bare, lacking even basic bedding. This is not an isolated incident, it is a pattern of mistreatment." Karen shot to her feet, her chair scraping loud against the floor. "That's not true. He just fell, that's all. Kids bruise, it's normal." The judge's gavel cracked like thunder. "Sit down, Mrs. Miller. You will speak only when spoken to." The gallery stirred, people whispering, shaking their heads. It wasn't just me or Martha anymore. The whole town was watching. And then the judge said the words that twisted the knife even deeper. "Custody of the child is hereby under review." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Custody under review. For a moment, Karen's face drained of color, then flushed red as she twisted toward David. "This is your fault," she hissed loud enough for the first few rows to hear. The judge banged the gavel again. "Enough! This is a courtroom, not your kitchen table." Richard Ellis rose slowly, like a man who had been in this arena countless times. "Your Honor, if I may, we request that temporary custody be granted to Mr. Miller until the conclusion of this case. The child's welfare is in immediate jeopardy if left in the current environment." Karen exploded, her voice cracking. "You can't take my son, he's mine. He belongs with his mother." The judge regarded her with a calm that cut sharper than anger. "Mrs. Miller, this court does not deal in possession. It deals in welfare. Sit down." David dropped his head into his hands, a picture of defeat. For once I almost pitied him. Almost. Because even if he was led there by fear, by Karen's manipulation, by financial pressure, he had still chosen to betray both his father and his son. The judge called for a recess. The bailiff's voice carried as people shuffled out into the marble hallway. My knees nearly buckled from the weight of it all, but Martha was there, steady as a lighthouse. She slipped her arm through mine and whispered, "You're doing right, John. Don't forget that." When we returned to the courtroom, the atmosphere had shifted. The judge looked sterner, as though she'd spent the recess measuring the gravity of what she was about to decide. "Mr. Ellis, proceed with the witnesses," she said. Martha was called first. She walked to the stand Bible pressed to her palm as she swore in. She testified clearly, her voice steady though her hands trembled on the rail. She recounted the countless times she had seen Ethan outside without proper clothing, the nights she'd heard shouting through the walls, the mornings when the boy's eyes looked hollow and bruised with exhaustion. Her words painted pictures so vivid that even the court reporter slowed her typing as if the air itself was weighed down with the truth. When Ellis asked, "Why did you call APS before?" Martha lifted her chin. "Because I knew something was wrong." But no one listened. Not until now. Karen's attorney, a young man with slick back hair and a smirk that never quite left his lips, tried to rattle her. "Mrs. Thompson, isn't it true that you've never been inside the Miller household?" Martha met his gaze head on. "I didn't need to be inside to see neglect. It was written all over that boy's face." The gallery murmured again, and even the judge's eyes softened. Then came my turn. I took the stand palms damp back stiff. I swore the oath, and Ellis began gently. "Mr. Miller, tell the court what you discovered regarding your finances." I laid it out as plainly as I could, the unexplained withdrawals, the notice from the bank, the papers the police had collected. Every word tasted like ash in my mouth, but each one seemed to land like a stone dropped in a still pond rippling through the room. When Ellis asked how it felt to learn my own son had drained my retirement savings, my throat tightened. I swallowed hard and said, "It felt like being robbed in broad daylight, only worse, because it wasn't a stranger, it was the boy I raised." Gasps whispered through the courtroom. David didn't look up. Karen's attorney tried his best, throwing out excuses about family misunderstanding, about financial pressure, about helping the household. But the documents didn't lie. When the judge finally leaned forward, glasses perched at the end of her nose, her voice was grave. "This court does not take elder financial abuse lightly, nor do we overlook the welfare of a child. Temporary custody of Ethan Miller is granted to his grandfather John Miller pending the conclusion of this case. The matter of financial restitution will be addressed in subsequent hearings." The gavel came down firm and final. Karen shrieked, lunging for David. "Do something! Stop this!" But David just sat there hollow, as though the last bit of fight had drained out of him. Ethan looked at me, then his small hand reaching up without hesitation. I bent down, gathered him close, and for the first time in a long while I felt something I hadn't dared hope for: relief. As we walked out of the courthouse, the afternoon sun spilling across the steps, I heard whispers ripple through the crowd, words like justice, scandal, shame. But I only tightened my grip on Ethan's hand and kept walking. Because this wasn't just about money anymore. It was about reclaiming dignity, about breaking a cycle, about protecting what mattered most. And I knew deep down this fight was far from over. The courthouse smelled faintly of polished wood and burnt coffee as we gathered again for the afternoon session. The echo of the judge's gavel from earlier still rang in my ears, custody under review. It wasn't final, but it was enough to stir panic in Karen. I saw her lean in close to David as we sat waiting for the clerk to call the case back in session. Her lips barely moved, but her words carried like a hiss of steam escaping a kettle. "You have to fight him, David. He's trying to take everything. If you let your father win, we lose Ethan. We lose the house. We lose everything." David didn't answer right away. His shoulders sagged. His fingers fumbled at the wedding ring that looked too tight for his swollen knuckle. He looked older than his years, worn down, but still shackled to the life he had built with her. Karen pressed harder, her hand gripping his thigh. "If you don't stand against him, then you're no man. Do you want everyone in town to think you let your father humiliate us?" Her words were knives meant to wound him into obedience. I watched the struggle in my son's eyes. For a moment, I almost wished he would look at me, meet my gaze, and remember who he once was. But his eyes stayed fixed on the floor. The bailiff called everyone to rise, and the judge returned to the bench. The air grew heavy with expectation. Richard Ellis, my lawyer, stood tall, "Your Honor. Before we proceed further, we have additional evidence to submit. It may clarify the pattern of neglect." Karen shot up like a spring. "Objection. This is harassment. They keep digging and digging because they have nothing solid." The judge held up a hand. "Sit down, Mrs. Miller. We'll hear it." Richard motioned to the technician at the side of the courtroom. A screen flickered to life. The grainy footage of a home security camera filled it, angled slightly from across the street. I recognized Martha's porch. The video played without sound at first, but the images were clear enough. Ethan, small and fragile, stood shivering outside the Miller house. He had no coat, only pajamas. It was night. The timestamp blurred, but the cold was obvious. The child blew into his hands, his breath visible even in the low light. Then the door opened. Karen appeared, her hand tight around Ethan's arm. She yanked him inside only to shove him back out, seconds later slamming the door shut in his face. The room went still. You could have heard a pin drop. The technician unmuted the sound and the faint cries of Ethan filled the chamber. "Please, Mommy, I'm cold." It cut through every heart in that courtroom like glass. I heard someone gasp from the gallery. The judge's jaw tightened, her pen clattering onto the desk. David buried his face in his hands. I saw his shoulders quake, whether from shame or grief I couldn't tell. Karen sat frozen, her face drained of blood. The judge leaned forward. "Play the next clip." Another video came up. Same porch, different night. Ethan sat on the steps, hugging his knees, a blanket too thin to keep him warm. Karen's voice from inside, sharp and cold. "Stay there until you learn to listen." A murmur swept across the courtroom. A man in the gallery whispered, "Good God," and others nodded grimly. The final clip showed Ethan curled up asleep on the porch swing, his small body trembling under the weight of the night. Martha's silhouette appeared, then draping her own coat over him before the screen faded to black. Silence followed. Not a lawyer, not a juror, not a clerk dared move. The judge took off her glasses and pinched the bridge of her nose. Karen tried to speak, her voice cracking. "That's taken out of context. He misbehaved." It wasn't. The judge cut her off, sharp as a blade. "Enough. What I see is not discipline, it is cruelty, and it will not be tolerated." David finally lifted his head, tears streaking down his face. He looked at me then, and for the first time in years, I saw the boy I once raised staring back, lost and broken. His voice broke as he whispered, "Dad, I'm sorry, but it was too late for apologies." The judge turned her gaze from him to me, then back again. "Mr. Miller, Mrs. Miller, the evidence presented is damning. This court cannot ignore such blatant neglect. Custody will be decided swiftly and charges will follow." Karen's chair screeched as she pushed back. "This is your fault," she spat at David. "If you had stood with me..." David shook his head, his words trembling. "I can't defend this anymore, Karen. Not after seeing that." The courtroom buzzed, voices rising and falling like waves against the shore. Reporters scribbled furiously, cameras clicked, and I could feel the weight of every eye upon us. But in that moment, none of it mattered. All I saw was Ethan sitting quietly at the back, clutching Martha's hand. His small fingers found mine when I walked toward him, and the warmth of his touch steadied the storm inside me. The judge banged her gavel. "This court will reconvene tomorrow for closing arguments. Until then, temporary custody of Ethan remains with his grandfather, John Miller." The words echoed like deliverance. Karen sank back into her seat, pale and defeated. David sat beside her, hollowed out, staring at nothing. And me, I stood a little taller, though my knees shook, though my heart ached for the wreckage of my family. Because in that instant, I knew the tide had turned. When the gavel struck again, the tension did not vanish. It only shifted like a thunderstorm, rolling deeper into the night sky. The judge had adjourned until the morning, but no one in that courtroom could walk away untouched by what we had just seen. I walked out slowly, Ethan's hand still in mine. His grip was small but firm, and for once I felt he trusted me completely. Martha followed close behind us, her lips pressed tight, her eyes scanning the hall as though daring anyone to question what had just unfolded. She had been vindicated, but I knew this wasn't about her pride, it was about justice finally catching up. Behind me, I heard Karen's voice rise again, sharp and frantic, bouncing off the marble walls. "You're weak, David. Do you hear me, weak? You let that old man and some busybody neighbor destroy our lives." Her words echoed, drawing stares from people lingering in the hallway. A few reporters lifted their microphones, but David didn't answer her. He only slumped against the wall, rubbing his temples as though he wanted to disappear inside himself. For a fleeting second, I almost pitied him. He was my son, after all. But then I thought of Ethan, of those nights he had been shoved outside like a stray animal, and the pity turned cold. Martha touched my arm gently. "John," she said, her voice low, "don't let them rattle you. What we saw in there, that was the truth. The whole town's going to hear about it now. She was right. By the time we stepped into the parking lot, I spotted 2 local TV vans parked across the street. Their satellite dishes pointed skyward, ready to beam the scandal into every living room in town. Ethan leaned into my side as we walked. "Grandpa," he whispered, "do I have to go back with them?" His voice shook not from the cold, but from fear. I bent down, meeting his eyes. "No, son, not tonight. You're with me now." His shoulders sagged with relief, and it broke me a little more inside. The ride home was quiet except for the hum of my old pickup. Martha had offered to follow us back just to make sure everything was safe. Through the rearview mirror, I saw Ethan fighting to keep his eyes open, his head bobbing before resting against the window. My chest tightened. A child shouldn't have to carry that kind of exhaustion. That was the weight of survival, not sleep. Back at my house, I tucked him into the spare bedroom. The room smelled faintly of cedar and old books, the kind of scent that comforts a soul. I pulled the quilt tighter around him. His small hand reached for mine again, and even in sleep he didn't let go right away. I stayed until his breathing evened out, then closed the door softly. In the kitchen, Martha sat at the table, 2 mugs of coffee steaming between us. "It's not over," she said. Her tone was steady, but I could tell her mind was already racing ahead to tomorrow's hearing. "Karen's the kind who'll claw and bite until her last breath. She won't accept losing easily." I nodded, staring into the dark liquid. "I know. But today changed everything. They can't hide anymore. People saw the truth. Still doubt gnawed at me. The system wasn't perfect. I'd lived long enough to see justice twisted, delayed, even denied. What if tomorrow didn't go the way we hoped?" As if reading my thoughts, Martha leaned forward. "Don't second-guess yourself, John. You stood up when it mattered. That boy in there, he knows you fought for him. That counts for more than any headline." Her words anchored me, at least for a while. But when I finally lay down that night, sleep did not come easily. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the clips again, the porch. The slam of the door, Ethan's breath clouding the air. The images weren't just evidence. They were scars burned into me, and I knew they'd stay with me as long as I lived. The next morning, I dressed in my best jacket, the one I hadn't worn since my wife's funeral. The mirror showed an old man with lined cheeks and tired eyes, but there was steel there too. This wasn't about pride anymore. This was about Ethan's future, about making sure my son's failures didn't cost another innocent soul his childhood. When we walked back into court, the gallery was even more crowded. Word had spread. Neighbors, church members, even folks I hadn't spoken to in years filled the benches. Some nodded to me as I passed. A few clasped my shoulder with quiet solidarity. Karen, by contrast, walked in with her chin high but her skin pale. The whispers that followed her were not kind. She could feel it too, the tide turning against her. David trailed behind her. His suit wrinkled, his expression hollow. He glanced at Ethan, then quickly looked away. It was the look of a man trapped between guilt and fear and unable to escape either. As the judge entered and the bailiff called the court to order, I held Ethan's hand firmly in mine. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a man on the defensive. I felt like someone finally standing in the right place with the truth at my back. Whatever came next, I knew the breaking point had been reached, and there was no turning back. The morning of the verdict, I woke up before the sun. My house was quiet except for the faint hum of the furnace kicking in. Ethan was still asleep in the guest room, curled under the quilt like he'd finally found a corner of safety. I lingered outside his door for a moment, listening to the soft rhythm of his breathing. That sound gave me the strength I needed. When we arrived at the courthouse, the steps were crowded with reporters and curious townsfolk. Word had spread far beyond our neighborhood now. Camera flashes burst like fireworks, voices overlapping with questions. "Mr. Miller, do you believe justice will be served today?" I didn't answer. Some battles you fight with words, but others require silence until the gavel comes down. Inside, the atmosphere was even heavier than before. The prosecution had laid out its case thoroughly the day prior. The financial records, the misuse of the power of attorney, the videos of Ethan left out in the cold. Every piece of evidence painted a picture that couldn't be explained away. David sat slumped in his chair, his tie askew, while Karen's eyes darted about like a trapped animal searching for an escape route. The judge entered and everyone rose. My palms were slick with sweat, though the room was cool. When we sat again, the judge's voice carried over the silence. This court has weighed the evidence carefully. The matter before us concerns both elder financial abuse and child neglect. Her words cut through me. Elder financial abuse. To hear it spoken aloud in a courtroom, it felt both humiliating and liberating. It wasn't just my suspicion anymore. It was the law calling it what it was. The judge turned toward David and Karen. The misuse of financial authority, documented withdrawals from Mr. Miller's retirement account, and testimony regarding coercion all point to a pattern of exploitation. Furthermore, video evidence presented by the neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, clearly demonstrates repeated acts of neglect toward the minor child, Ethan Miller. Karen shifted in her seat, her hands clenched into fists. David didn't move. Therefore, the judge continued. This court finds both David Miller and Karen Miller guilty of elder financial abuse and child neglect. The words hit like stones dropped in still water. The courtroom rippled with gasps and murmurs. Martha squeezed my shoulder from behind, whispering, "It's done, John. You did it." But I didn't feel victorious. Not yet. The judge wasn't finished. Custody of Ethan Miller is hereby awarded to his grandfather, John Miller, effective immediately. Mr. and Mrs. Miller are to have no unsupervised contact with the child. Further sentencing on criminal charges will be scheduled in the coming weeks. I closed my eyes, the weight of it all crashing over me. Ethan was safe, that mattered most. But my son, my only son, sat at that table, his face ashen as bailiffs approached. The click of the handcuffs was louder than any sound I'd heard all morning. "Dad!" David's voice cracked as they pulled him to his feet. He didn't resist. His eyes finally met mine, filled with something between sorrow and resignation. I never meant for it to go this far. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. My heart ached in two directions at once, toward the boy I had raised and the grandson I now had to protect. Karen, on the other hand, thrashed in her seat, shouting at the judge, at the bailiffs, at me. "This is a setup. You're all against us. He's manipulating everyone." Her words spilled like poison, but no one listened. The bailiffs held her firm as she kicked and screamed, her face twisted with rage. The judge's gavel struck 3 times. "Order in the court." The sound silenced the chaos, at least for a moment. Reporters scrambled for their headlines, and I already knew what tomorrow's paper would say. Thanksgiving scandal in suburbia. It was the kind of story that would stain a family name for decades. When the proceedings ended, I walked back to where Ethan sat with Martha. His small body trembled, uncertain of what it all meant. I knelt down, my voice low but steady. "You're safe now," I whispered. His eyes filled with tears as he wrapped his arms around my neck. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. After the gavel fell and the courtroom emptied, I stayed behind a few moments, my hand resting on Ethan's shoulder. The reporters rushed past us toward the parking lot, their voices echoing through the halls. Martha gave me a look that said she would handle the crowd if they came too close. I nodded, grateful. As we walked outside, the November air cut sharp against my face, but it carried with it a sense of release. For weeks, maybe months, I had lived with a storm in my chest. Now, though the skies were gray, I could feel a sliver of peace. Ethan clung to my hand, his eyes wide, as he tried to understand what had just happened inside. "Grandpa," he asked softly, "does this mean I get to stay with you?" I stopped on the courthouse steps, crouched down, and looked straight into his eyes. "Yes, son, you'll be with me now. No more nights in the cold. No more fear. Just us." His lips trembled before breaking into a small smile, fragile but real. That smile lit something inside me I thought I had lost. Behind us, I caught sight of David being escorted into a waiting van, his hands cuffed in front of him. He didn't shout, didn't resist. He just glanced over his shoulder, once his face hollow. It was the look of a man finally realizing the cost of every choice he had made. Karen, by contrast, screamed until the bailiffs shoved her into a separate vehicle. Her fury still burned, but it was powerless now, spent against the weight of the law. Martha stepped up beside me. "Come on, John, let's get Ethan home." Her voice was steady, practical, but her eyes shone with a kind of fierce relief. She had fought for this boy in her own quiet way, and now she stood as witness to his freedom. The ride home was different this time. No silence filled with dread. No worries about what would happen tomorrow. Ethan sat in the back seat holding a stuffed bear Martha had given him, humming softly to himself. The hum wasn't much, just a child's tune, but it was the sound of a soul beginning to heal. When we reached my house, the neighbors were waiting. Word had already spread faster than any newspaper could print. Mrs. Henderson from across the street came over with a casserole. For the boy, she said, simply, tears in her eyes. Others waved from their porches, offering nods of support. In a town where gossip once cut me down, now compassion reached out like open hands. That night, after Ethan fell asleep in the spare room, I sat at the kitchen table with Martha. The clock ticked softly, the house warm with the smell of her coffee. She broke the silence first. "It's never easy, is it? Justice doesn't come without scars." I nodded, staring at the steam curling from my mug. "No. And those scars will never fade for me, Martha." Seeing my own son in handcuffs. My voice cracked and I stopped to steady myself. But Ethan, he has a chance now. That's worth every cut I took along the way. She reached across the table, her hand resting on mine. "You did what a father had to do and what a grandfather was called to do. You saved him." Her words settled in me like a final verdict, one deeper than the courts. Later, when I checked on Ethan, I found him sprawled across the bed, one arm draped over the quilt, breathing evenly. His face was soft, free of tension for the first time since I'd found him that Thanksgiving day. I leaned down, brushing a hand across his hair, and whispered again, "You're safe now." I don't know if he heard me in his dreams, but I felt the truth of it in my bones. Whatever came next, the sentencing, the headlines, the whispers of the town, it didn't matter. Justice had been served and the boy was safe. For the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to believe in tomorrow. It was a year later, almost to the day, when I found myself standing in my kitchen basting a turkey with a brush that had belonged to my late wife. The house smelled of rosemary and sage, and for the first time in what felt like decades, the scent filled me with peace instead of longing. Ethan sat at the table nearby, carefully folding paper place cards he had made himself. He had scrawled names across them in his uneven handwriting. John, Ethan, Martha, Pastor. Jim, Mrs. Henderson, the Thompson kids. He wanted everyone who had stood by us through that dark winter to have a seat at our table. Outside, the November air carried the crispness of fallen leaves and the distant echo of children's laughter. I glanced through the window and saw Martha walking up the path, a casserole balanced in her hands. She wore a knitted scarf, bright red against the gray sky, and she waved when she caught me watching. Ethan bolted from his chair, running to the door to greet her, his small feet thumping against the hardwood floor. The living room looked different now than it had that dreadful Thanksgiving when I barged into David's house. This place bore no stain of wealth or grandeur, no designer furniture, no polished granite countertops, but it was ours. Photos lined the mantel, most of them of Ethan his first baseball game that spring, his grin missing 2 front teeth at the church Easter egg hunt, his proud smile holding up a spelling bee ribbon. Each picture was proof of a life rebuilt. By noon, the house buzzed with voices. Neighbors carried in dishes wrapped in foil. The Hendersons brought pies, and the pastor led a blessing before we all sat down. Ethan sat to my right, Martha to my left. I caught myself smiling at the simple beauty of it. No reporters outside, no shouting matches, no slammed doors. Just the low hum of conversation, the clinking of forks, the sound of belonging. At one point, Pastor Jim nudged me. "John, would you say a few words?" I stood, my knees creaking as they always did, but my voice came steady. Last year I thought Thanksgiving had ended for me. I thought family was something I'd lost, maybe forever. But I learned something the hard way. No feast, no wealth, no appearance can hide cruelty. True family is built on compassion, or it's not family at all. The room fell quiet. Every face looked toward me, kind, patient, understanding. Ethan slipped his hand into mine under the table. His palm was small but warm, grounding me. "I won't lie to you," I continued. "I still carry pain. I lost my son in more ways than one, but I gained something too, a reminder that love can grow again even after betrayal. This boy beside me deserves a life where he is cherished, not used. And with all of you, I believe he'll have it." A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. Martha brushed a tear from her cheek, and Mrs. Henderson gave a firm nod. Later, as the meal wound down, Ethan leaned close and whispered, "Grandpa, this is the best Thanksgiving ever." I laughed softly, squeezing his hand. It's the first of many, buddy. The sun dipped low as the day stretched on, casting a golden glow through the window. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the urge to look back. The past was a scar, yes, but scars don't define you. They remind you of what you've survived. As the laughter rose around me, as the warmth of family-chosen family settled into the walls of my modest home, I felt certain of one truth: justice had been served, but mercy had followed. And that was enough to carry us forward. As the afternoon stretched into early evening, the table was cluttered with empty plates and half-eaten pies. The kids from down the street darted in and out of the living room, their laughter trailing behind them like music. Someone had brought a deck of cards, and soon enough a group of the older neighbors settled into a game of gin rummy at the far end of the table. I sat back in my chair for a moment, letting the sound of it all wash over me. For once there was no tension under my roof, only ease. Martha leaned closer, setting down her coffee cup with a gentle clink. You know, John, she said this house hasn't felt empty since Ethan came to live here. It's good to see life in it again. I looked at her and nodded, my throat tightening. I didn't think I'd ever hear children's footsteps in here again, I admitted. It feels like the house was waiting for him, same as me. She smiled, lines deepening at the corners of her eyes. He's thriving, John. You gave him something no money ever could. Safety. I glanced toward Ethan. He was sprawled on the rug with two of the Thompson kids, building a tower of blocks that seemed destined to topple at any second. When it did, he burst out laughing instead of shrinking back in fear the way he used to. That laugh alone told me more than words ever could. As dusk began to fall, Pastor Jim suggested we all gather in the living room for a prayer of thanks. We circled up holding hands. When it came time for me to speak again, I drew a deep breath. I want to thank you all, I said, looking around at each familiar face. A year ago, I thought I'd lost everything. But you showed me that family isn't just blood. It's the people who refuse to walk away when things get ugly. You carried Ethan and me through when we couldn't stand on our own. That's something I'll never forget. The room grew still, the kind of silence that carries weight. Martha squeezed my hand, and I felt Ethan press closer to my side. After the prayer, as neighbors bundled up to leave, I stood on the porch with Ethan at my hip, watching the line of taillights disappear down our street. The cold November air bit at my skin, but it didn't matter. For the first time in a long while, the future didn't scare me. Ethan tugged at my sleeve. Grandpa. Yeah, buddy. Can we do this every year? His eyes were wide, hopeful, like he was afraid the answer might slip away. I bent down, brushing the hair off his forehead. Every year, I promised. As long as I've got breath in me, we'll have Thanksgiving together. He smiled, the kind of smile that lights up a whole room. And in that moment, standing on my porch with the boy who'd become my reason for carrying on, I felt the weight of all those painful months finally lift. Life hadn't given me the ending I once imagined with my son, but it had given me a second chance with my grandson. And that I realized was more than enough. Inside, the last of the dishes sat soaking in the sink, the smell of turkey still lingering in the air. Tomorrow would bring chores, bills, and the ordinary grind of life. But tonight this house had been full of warmth, laughter, and the kind of love no court could grant, no newspaper could cheapen, and no betrayal could erase. I pulled the door shut behind us, locking it with a steady hand. Come on, Ethan, I said softly. Let's get ready for bed. We've got a new tradition to keep. And as the house settled into quiet, I knew with certainty that our story had finally turned the page. Life has a way of testing the bonds we hold most dear, and this story reminds us that blood alone does not define family love, compassion, and responsibility do. John's journey shows the courage it takes for an elder to stand up against betrayal, even when it comes from his own child. Many older adults fear losing independence, dignity, or being silenced. Yet John's resilience proves that speaking out can restore both justice and hope. Ethan's rescue is not only about protecting a child, but about breaking the cycle of neglect and showing that kindness must anchor every home. The support of neighbors and community highlights how essential it is to look out for one another, especially for the vulnerable. In the end, forgiveness may remain complicated, but healing grows from truth. True wealth is not property or savings. It is the safety and love we pass on to the next generation. If you enjoyed this story, please like the video, Subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box to the right.